Greetings, this is Steve McKenzie, former 20-year member of the Microsoft Visual C++ team. Now doing other things. I own a nonprofit organization. I'm not going to talk too much about that right now, except the fact that stay tuned to my YouTube channel. I'll be uploading a concert, a benefit concert. That'll be coming around the end of May and some more in the summer. Anyway, I'm in solidarity with the human condition now, but I'm still into technology. And here, I'm going to show you how to configure Rust and VSCode on the FreeBSD operating system. So I'm jumping right to the result. Here we are on an older machine running FreeBSD and X Windows in a desktop environment. And here's VSCode. And so I'll tell you that we're using the Rust for Visual C extension and the Vim plugin. Also, as an aside, if you wanted good code complete for C++ on FreeBSD, the C++ Clang, what's it called? It's called, it's by Yusuaki Matani. It's called the C++ Clang Command Adapter. And this works great, but I'm not going to get into that now. I'm not going to demo it, but if you want to use C++ and VS Code, that's a good plug-in to have code completion and so on in FreeBSD, with Clang as the native compiler in FreeBSD. But we're focusing on Rust, and so I didn't have to do much. I've go to here and run build task. It picked it up. I didn't have to configure it. And here it is, Rust cargo build, and there it goes over here in the terminal. Of course, you can do it manually over here. You can say cargo, you can say build, and it'll build, but you can say run too, and it'll build and run. And so here's your output. Also, when you install Rust using RustUp, which is how I recommend it in my steps that we're going to cover, you will get the Rust GDB, which is a wrapper to GDB with pretty printers of types. So, for example, if you want to look at a type string, which is a container, really, it'll just show you the contents that you're interested in, like string. Although I am interested in the other fields, such as capacity and length. So, regular GDB or LLDB, sometimes in some ways is more informative. So here's a debugging session. We'll just use LLDB. And okay, so we're going to set a breakpoint on, I happen to know it's line 3 in the main file. And we'll run. So here's the code, and all it does is calls this function here that I have in a different module. And so we're going to step into that. And now we see, here's this routine. We can look at text, this variable called text, and there it is. It tells you it's a data pointer, and here's the contents and so on. Okay, so won't get into that too much, and quit, clear that. What else? Okay, and so the Intellisense. Let's take a look at that. So this instance of hash map, the instance name is map, and we'll hit the dot and drop down all the methods, and any that take arguments, it's going to provide those arguments. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. And if you just hover over this hash map, let's see, if I go, yeah, you can go right to the definition, or you can get this documentation by hovering over it. It gives you what it is. It's struct. There's no classes in Rust. We're not going to get too much into Rust here. It's a generic, so it takes templated arguments. K, I would say, stands for key, and the V stands for value. S equals state. Here's a link to the full documentation, and then here's just the synopsis. Hash map implemented, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it's pretty nice. So that's the result, and so how do we get there? And so we're going. Let me bring up the README that I have on my GitHub repository, and I'll have a link to it in this YouTube video. Okay, so we'll go ahead and log out of this remote desktop session from Windows. And so here we have a remote session through SSH. Now it's optional. I'm going to show you how to get a remote desktop session, but if you're only interested in getting Windows on FreeBSD, then you can opt out. So we'll just kind of talk about these real quickly. You can just open up the document yourself and have at it. So FreeBSD is a great server, right? That's probably its main application, but I contend that it's a powerful development environment. I really like FreeBSD. It's, you know, it's more edgy than just Linux, right? Linux is more mainstream and it's less interesting to me. And for me, what's interesting and when I'm doing code is like using Vim and FreeBSD and all the command line tools. And I really don't use VSCode much, but I think people are interested in using VSCode. And if I want to use Intellisense, I will use VSCode. I don't like having a lot of plugins in Vim, such as ucomplete me and so on. Just looks great, but I'm not sure it's not really supported on FreeBSD. So that's a drawback about FreeBSD, but you get more support on lots of stuff on Linux. But FreeBSD is stable, you know, and there's great documentation, and I'm not going to say Linux isn't designed, it's sort of like herding cats, but there's a board and kind of a hierarchy in FreeBSD, and things are a little bit more managed, let's say. But anyway, not here to promote FreeBSD either. So here on line 5 here, following steps demonstrate how to install a desktop environment. We're using the xfce4 on FreeBSD. I know you can install KDE or GNOME or whatever, but I install xfce4 because it works well with the remote desktop environment. But you can opt out of that and forget about the remote desktop. So here's what I expect. I expect you to have a basic FreeBSD installation. It's pretty straightforward, and there's other videos on how to do that. But just the only option is make sure to enable SSH. And then if you want to be compatible with this video, don't choose bash for your shell. Choose, well, I use tcsh. I think the same would work with CSH, although I haven't verified that. So tcsh for sure would work. On an older machine like this, the machine I'm targeting is a Dell XPS 8300. It's i7 2700, 4-core, 8-thread, 12 gig of memory, running FreeBSD, and I've configured it using the ZFS file system. Also, I installed Vim just because I don't want to run VI. I want Vim's a little bit friendlier. So, you know, here's the instruction. I'm trying to be explicit about things to do logged in as root and things to do logged in as normal user. So I expect that you understand those concepts. I'm not going to, you know, that use the su command to move over to super user to execute as root. So section 1 is our first section to install a desktop. So we're going to do this as root. So here's the command, package install xorg. And so you're going to continue running as root and then run this command. And this adds replace this user. This is just a placeholder for your normal user that you want to be running the desktop. So replace user here and user here with your normal user and run this command. Then as root still, install xcfe4. And so you do that. Now on FreeBSD, the package is called xfce without the 4. So note that. So here's the command. And now it's important, log out of root and back in the normal user, because we want to set up the normal user's desktop environment by running this command. You're piping in this command into your xinitrc. This gets this is the start x, which will look for this. It's part of the chain of commands to start the X Windows system. So then on your target machine, you know, the machine that you're setting up, see right now I'm remote shelling in using SSH into this machine, but you might be sitting at the machine. And so if you are, then start the desktop and logged in as normal user, just run start X and the desktop should come up. If it doesn't, you might try rebooting. If it still doesn't, that means you may need to have the right driver, and you'll have to load a module and specify it in your etc rc.config, and I'm not going to cover that here. You're on your own there. So if you have some fancy video card, yeah, I mean, this works. FreeBSD works great on like 5-year-old machines. Well, it works great on pretty new machines, maybe not bleeding edge because the drivers aren't developed yet. Okay, so the point is make sure the desktop loads successfully before proceeding, right? Because you're not going to be able to install VS Code if you don't have a desktop, and you're not going to be able to get remote desktop to work if the desktop doesn't load on the native machine, on the target machine. And if you're not interested in remote desktop, you can skip the following sections and just proceed to section 4. I'm probably not going to time to stamp that because this should be a quick video. You can just open the link to this document and do it yourself. So anyway, to set up a remote desktop accessible from the Windows operating system and also from Linux using Remina or whatever, you're still going to have to do this. But I've verified this from Windows operating system using the remote desktop connection application. Okay, so on your FreeBSD machine, log in or su to root, and then package install xrdp package. Okay, then as root still, and be careful with this step. You don't want to hork your /etc etc, your /etc/rcconfig. If you do that, if you miss a quote or something, then when you reboot, it's going to reboot as a read-only file system, and that's a pain. And you'll have to, do some fancy mounting and hopefully not have to reinstall to edit this file. So just be careful and add these 2 lines: xrdp_enable equal double quote yes and double quote, and then the same thing with xrdp_sysman_enable equals double quoted yes. Okay, now as root still, open the //local/etc/xrdp/startwm.sh into your editor of choice, like Vim. And you'll see there's a bunch of commented out commands, that exec and then some desktop. And if whatever desktop you install, like if you're not interested in remote desktop and you went ahead and installed KDE or GNOME or whatever, uncomment out that command and comment out exec xterm, which is the default. Okay? Then save that and reboot as root. Okay. Now, on your Windows machine, now you want a remote desktop into it, assuming that your desktop comes up on the native machine, and maybe you aren't able to verify because you don't have a monitor for it, and you're doing all this from SSH. That's okay. This should work. If you have the right drivers and everything. So open the remote desktop app, type that in here in your Windows run thing. Then here, I'll show you what that looks like. So remote desktop. Okay, so in the computer, just put in the IP address of the FreeBSD machine. Now, if you don't know that somehow, if you would have to know that if you're SSHing into it, but if you're not, you're just at the local machine, go ahead and type ifconfig command as root, and it'll be one that looks kind of like this. It'll be like a 3, it'll have a 1, then it'll look something like that. And then put in your username, the user that you specified in section 1, step 2. That you, in this step here, this user, replace user with the normal user. And then check out your display options. Now, for this video, I'm only using single monitor because I'm only capturing this monitor with my recording software. But this supports dual monitors, and that's how I run FreeBSD, is on dual monitors. It's awesome. And then you can specify, if you want the audio to play on the FreeBSD machine or have it pipe back through your host. Same thing with printer and clip, and then you can have the clipboard work between your host machine and your target FreeBSD machine, and these other things, yeah, those are the main ones, display and local resources. And then you go ahead and connect, and you'll get a screen that looks like this. This is your xorg login screen. You type in your password. And there you go. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and log out of that. We'll come back to this as we add applications. Okay, so now we have now that we have remote desktop working. By the way, back when you load that desktop through remote desktop for the first time, it might take a bit to load up, like 5-10 seconds. But if it just sits there, then I don't know, and make sure that you can't skip these steps of like in your etc rc config. You need to make sure xrdp enable equals yes and so on. Okay, so now this you can do from your secure shell or from your remote desktop installation. So let's just go back to that. No, let's stay here and just talk about it, because I don't need to show you this. You know how to paste these in. So you need to install some tools. Here we're in section 4. So you need to install Firefox if you want to use the Rust docs. And you'll want to. So here's that command. And you may or may not want to read some PDF files. I have some on my GitHub repository that you can get. That I have a bunch of PDFs on programming related books. C++ standard, or whatever, lots of stuff. And so you can, this is the one I use xpdf. So install package, package install xpdf as root. And then now you can install the Rust package that comes with FreeBSD, but I don't recommend that. I want to use RustUp, and use RustUp gives you the latest and gives you a lot of extra features, gives you all the extra tools and so on, so that your binary compatibility with all the extra tools. And so to do that, now this command here, sh default toolchain nightly, that's what I ran because I want to use the bleeding edge. But if you don't, if you want the latest stable, just run the command from this, end it here. Don't truncate this command. Don't run this pipe and everything to the right of it. So that will copy and create this folder on your home. Do this as again, do this as normal user, because you want this to be in your home directory. Okay, and so now to get the Rust and Cargo and all the diagnostic tools like Clippy and Rust format into your TCH shell path, open up your .cshrc file as normal user, and then add this line, set path. So if you're running bash, I think you want to say export. It has a different syntax, and I'm not familiar with that, so you'll have to look that up. But if you're running C shell or TCH shell, this is what you want to run. Okay, and then in your normal user home directory, let's test it out. So just add a Rust project directory, or whatever name you want to give it. There's some reserved names, and this one works, so make dir Rust proj, and then cd into it. Then as normal user, run cargo init. Now, cargo should be in your path, and this will create a skeleton Rust project. You can check out what it created, and you can run cargo build, cargo run, and watch it, or just run cargo run. It'll build it and run it. But let's move on to the next step. So as root, install VSCode. So package install VSCode, and this will install the FreeBSD's VSCode package. Now go back to normal user, and navigate into your project you just made, the Rust_project directory, and run VSCode space dot, and dot means current directory, so that will launch VSCode, and I think it will open it as the current that'll be the working space, your current directory. Okay, and so then from when you have VS Code open, you know, I can show you I'll show you the icon for the extensions, but you can say Control Shift capital X, and that'll bring up the extensions. And you want to search for this one, rust.lang.rust, and it's called the Rust for Visual Studio extension. So install that. And okay, that's good. So we will done with this and done with this session, and so let's run the remote again, and I'll show you those packages. I think I showed you the package already at the beginning, didn't I? So let's go to Rust project VS Code dot. Now this is my layout. If you open a new terminal, we'll put it at the bottom. If you right click on terminal, it tells you where you can move it. I moved mine to right because I want to have it here so I can just do all my console commands right here. And so it's all integrated, which is great. So this right here, this is the extensions. And so what you do is you could type in that rust.lang -lang.lang. And so here it is right here. And if you look at the settings, is it going to show me? Extension settings. Okay, here we go. So here's the name of it. Rust-lang.rust. That's the official name of it. So if you put that in there, you'll get the right one. .rust. There it is. Okay, that's the one I have installed. All right. And so I think that's it. Oh, I want to show you my GitHub. All right. So I'm going to log out of this. And so it's GitHub. GitHub SteveMac321. My email alias at Microsoft was Steve Mac, so I just added a 321 at the end, and that's my I have 13 repositories. There's lots of stuff up here. This is in snippets, and I'll put that FreeBSD drop. I'll put that README in here. I'll have a link to it in this video in the description. I just have, this isn't a project, it just has lots of code. Yeah, I don't know, just kind of where I save stuff. This is yeah, this was I took this class at the University of Washington on programming microcontrollers, and the teacher told me this was the fewest lines of code that solved this problem. It read the temperature and then blinked a light when the temperature got high enough. And you know, the reason I could do that is because I'm a language nerd, and I explored the ARM language, and what basically this is what gave people were jumping based on conditions. They jumped to a function. They didn't realize that in ARM assembly there's these if then else blocks and if then and so on, and so that saved me a lot of code. Anyway, so that's interesting. And then another thing that's interesting, if you're into low level, this is my Raspberry Pi library, and so I have the sort routine, which I'm pretty proud of. Here, let me make this print bigger. So this runs on, I might have to change some of the directives to run on a micro controller, but on Raspberry Pi this works. So what I did is I wrote this is insertion sort in C. And here's the declaration. So here's what it looks like. It takes an array, a reference to an array. It takes a count, a number of elements, and then it takes a swap functor. Okay, and so you could add. It'd be nice to add a size here and make it exactly like qsort, but I can swap any type that's the size of pointer, so integers, strings, whatever, and so I can swap a lot of types that are the same size as a pointer. But if you added a size, and so here's a couple of functors I wrote in assembly, but I have functors in C that I have a test driver that does a bunch of stuff. And so, yeah, anyway, I'm just showing here the shifting that happens to walk the array. So it's well documented if you want to understand that. And so there's driver code in here to run it. So you can run this on a Raspberry Pi. I have mlibs is a full library that targets a microcontroller that has both C and C++, like standard library type functionality. And I said someone used this in China. They forked it. And then I wrote, for a personal exercise, I wrote a C++ 14, so it's getting older now, vector class, and I got to conform industry standard conformance tests when I still had access to those tests. I don't anymore. And then YC is, this is content I use for a lecture I gave at Linux Fest Northwest in 2018. If you want to, there's a better video that's sort of a philosophy on programming languages, especially C++, called, what's it called? From Journeyman to Expert, Lowering the Learning Curve for C++. I lay out rationale for bridging the gap between a journeyman and expert in C++ programming. And it doesn't have a lot of views, but some leaders in the C++ community did watch it and got good feedback on that. And so that's on my YouTube channel as well. Let's see, anything else interesting? I have some Google test framework stuff and some Python code. And PDFs are those programming books. I have the C programming language, the KNR, ARM assembly programming, ARM dev guide, digital design PDF, digital design computer architecture, effective C++, the Intel analysis of the Spectre's speculative execution for the Spectre and Meltdown. Here's Intel. This is all the opcodes for the Intel processor. Linux kernel book, metaprogramming book, an old C++ spec, ARM development, Python crash course, a bunch of stuff. Unix, all kinds of stuff. GDB manual and Unicode. Anyway, there's a bunch of free stuff you can download from up here. All my stuff is GPL2'd, so just if you do make any changes to my code, I just ask that you contribute back, like if you want to add a parameter to that sort routine. Okay, I think that's enough. Hope you enjoyed it, and be on the lookout on my channel for my concerts. In my youth, I was somewhat of a classical guitar prodigy, and I picked that up again, and it's going very well. I'm performing again, and my program will be ready for my first dry run in the middle of May. So stay tuned for that. And when that does come up, contribute to the charity that I will be giving links to. So thanks for your attention. Take care.